Energy 808, the cutting edge, today with Public Utilities Commissioner Colin Yost. Really excited to have him on board. We'll be right back. So, Colin, my friend, here we are. Now that you have officially let go of the interim part of your PUC title, you are now PUC Commissioner Colin A. Yost. So thank you so very much, Colin. I've been looking forward to having you on the show for a long time. So thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Marco. Happy to be here.
So let's dive right into it. Things changed at the PUC last fall with Commissioner Potter deciding that she was going to exit before her official term ends, which would be in end of June next year. And at some point, somebody contacted you and said, dude, you interested in being PUC commissioner? And kind of the rest is history. So here you sit now. My first question to you is, what caused you to want to leave your life essentially there at Revolution, working with Josh and that great crew, and to come on board the PUC?
Well, I had already been thinking about a transition out of the private sector and into some kind of public service, whether it was government or nonprofit. My second child, my last child, is graduating high school this year, so I'm on the verge of the empty nest. Just got a few more months with him, and that's sort of a perfect time to reevaluate, what I'm doing in life, what more I could do to try to make a difference in the world. So that was my main motivation, is to try to think about ways in which I could make hopefully even a greater difference in a positive sense in society and in the world at large, with given where I live and given the opportunities that exist.
So would it be correct to assume that prior to October of last year, you'd already kind of had it in mind, or kind of put the intention out there, as one says, to the cosmos, that you were ready for some type of change, and public service was perhaps part of that. So this is a case, it sounds like, of the universe responding in a very positive way, giving you this opportunity.
Yes, it did come out of the blue. I had no idea that Commissioner Potter was considering leaving early. But when I did get the call from the EGA administration, it did feel like a perfect fit and a real exciting opportunity to come into an agency that's got a great reputation for getting things done, for innovative programs. And, I was just excited to join that and be part of the team here.
So I'm kind of curious, Colin. I mean, it would be normal for anybody to feel excitement, right, at such a change and such a challenge. I'm wondering, just kind of curiously, whether you had much fear and anxiety. This is, be careful what you wish for, right, man? That this is a big thing to wish for, not only to wish for, but something that landed in your plate. So was there much in terms of, now what?
Of course, some of that. You don't know exactly what you're getting into. And, I did have some fear, having practiced before the PUC on and off over the years, that there might be part of the job that would just be really technical and tedious. Interestingly, I haven't found that to be the case at all. I've been here now 6 months. All of the issues we work on, once you really delve into them, once you immerse yourself in them, are clearly meaningful in everyday people's lives. And even if the PUC is an agency that a lot of people don't necessarily really know what we do, behind the scenes, people are working really hard to try to figure out the right answer and what's in the public interest relating to the provision of all kinds of necessities to people in Hawaii. Not just electricity, but obviously telecommunications and water and intra-island movement of goods through Young Brothers, even the motor carriers. I mean, all those things make a difference in people's lives, and I enjoy being part of trying to make sure that we're making the right decisions.
I'm wondering, given that the learning curve, I would think, was pretty steep coming, as you were first sworn in. I'm wondering if there was a time in the past months where you kind of felt that you were over that hump, so to speak. Not that everything's going to be smooth from now on, because that's really not what life is about, but kind of an over the hump moment for you, and whether that's happened yet for you.
I do actually feel that way. I don't presume or pretend that I know everything, and I've got an enormous amount to learn. I think one thing that helped me, obviously, is being a lawyer for 25 years. Having a background in law does enable you to understand and review new concepts, legal issues fairly quickly and efficiently. And then also, I was surprised at how much I remembered from my first stint in public service with the Oregon Department of Justice. That's back in 1998 to 2003. And there I was an assistant attorney general in the financial fraud consumer protection section. And in that job, you were a prosecutor, but you were also kind of a judge, because nearly all of the cases you were resolving, were kind of regulatory. You were figuring out what the real solution should be for the business, for the consumer. You weren't trying to put people out of business. And most of the cases were resolved in something called an assurance of voluntary compliance, which actually reads a lot like a PUC order, interestingly. I mean, it lays out the background of the issue at hand. It gets into, what the agency, in that case, it was Department of Justice, thought, and it lays out an order, a sequence of what happens next. So I wrote hundreds of those in that 5-year period when I worked with Oregon DOJ, and it all kind of came back to me pretty easily in terms of understanding how the structure of PUC decision-making works and is laid out.
That's a good lead into my next question, which is, I always like to ask this question, Colin, which is, so you've been at it now for a little more than 6 months. What, if anything, has surprised you over the past 6 months that maybe you weren't necessarily anticipating?
I actually have been surprised at how everything seems to function fairly seamlessly in terms of just the process of moving one step to another in each docket. From the outside, the PUC did seem a little like a black box when I was there before. And it's just difficult to see and understand exactly why certain things take the time that they do and why other things move faster. And all of that, as I've come inside and seen what's going on, there are reasons for everything, right? And the reasons are good ones. And so they're not always perfectly satisfying to the public or to the utilities that are being regulated, but they are all being done in good faith and for a purpose. I also was really happy that both Leo and Naomi, my fellow commissioners, are very interested in trying to make the PUC more transparent to the public. The equity docket, which I know you probably want to talk about, is a great example of that, of how we're opening up the commission to people who don't normally interact with it and helping to explain how they can provide value, how they can provide information that's relevant to decision making that affects all kinds of different issues. And also kind of a commitment on behalf of my fellow commissioners to speed things up, like to react more quickly, be more responsive to public and utility inquiries, and try to keep things moving, try never to be, as best we can, a bottleneck that slows down progress. We do not want that to be associated with our agency. So, I'm just very optimistic and happy about the way everything is working here and about what I think we can continue to achieve.
That's great to hear. And before I take a dive into the substance, of which there's tons of substance, of course, I want to stay on the politics side for a moment or two, which is you went through the process, maybe some would consider something of a gauntlet, something in between, of talking to many senators. There's a total of 25 senators in the Hawaii State Senate, You passed by an overwhelming vote, 23-0, with 2 excused absences. Can't do much better than that. And I'm wondering what advice or words of wisdom, any guidance that you might give someone who is following, inevitably, they will, follow in your footsteps as far as pointers or suggestions that you think are worth passing on.
Well, I hope to go through the whole process again next year, as you know, so I can give advice to my future self as well. But I think the way I approached the process, which I felt ultimately was very helpful to me, at least, was to have each of these conversations with the senators be a source or an opportunity for information gathering, for learning, understanding better what each senator's constituents and what each senator cared about, what they thought about the work of the PUC, where they thought improvement could be made. And so that was actually a very important part of my learning curve, was all of those conversations. I felt I learned an enormous amount from each of the senators, and that was invaluable to me to gaining a perspective of how the outside world views the PUC, especially from the important perspective of the Senate. And that's been really helpful to me. And I think they felt, I believe, that I was engaging with them genuinely and really wanting to know what they had to say and what concerns they may or their constituents may have. And so it was a very productive and mutually beneficial dialogue.
So I hear what you're saying, and I'm wondering just how, as you were speaking to multiple senators, what came across to you as far as their level of engagement regarding what the PUC does and exactly what the PUC does do. In other words, without getting into names, but how knowledgeable, how engaged did you feel senators were as far as the mission of the PUC and how they felt about the PUC achieving its mission?
Generally, I found them to be highly engaged and knowledgeable. And I think part of that is reflected in the statutes, Hawaii statutes, right? If you look at Chapter 269 and some of the other subsequent statutes that deal with PUC activity, they are surprisingly detailed. The legislature has gotten very interested over the years in what the PUC does and has had a lot to say about what they think the PUC should do. And it's tempting, if you look at all those statutes, to start to think that the legislature might be micromanaging the PUC, but in my experience of applying these statutes to the work that we're doing here, I don't see it that way at all, actually. I found the guidance to be very helpful. And for example, I could call your attention to what statute HRS 269-145.5. That's an example of how many of these chapters we've got, these subchapters, right? But the subject matter of that is advanced grid modernization technology and principles. And it doesn't tell the PUC exactly what it should do or how it should come to any given decision, but it lays out very clear principles and guidelines for the kinds of things the PUC should balance in an area that's pretty tricky. So it's actually very useful, and I'm very appreciative to have this kind of specific guidance from the legislature so that we know how to make a better decision that's more in line with Hawaii's state energy goals.
And just to pick up on something you said a few moments ago, to be clear for all our viewers, is that your term right now ends the 30th of June next year, a little more than a year from now. So it is your desire, your intention to seek a full 6-year term starting on July 1st, 2024, correct?
Yes, it is. Of course, the first person I'd have to speak to is the governor. It's the governor's discretion as to whether he would reappoint me for another term. But as of where I sit right now, I would very much like to continue. I've been enjoying the job so far and feel like I can make a significant difference.
Great. Let's take a dive into the substance. First question for you is, what do you identify as the most important energy issues? Let's stick with energy for the time being. The most important energy issues facing the state of Hawaii at present?
It's really how do we move, and this is actually paraphrasing a statement that the Deputy Secretary of Energy, who was out here for a Hawaii Energy Forum conference a few months ago, David Turk, I believe his name is, he said, how do we move into this transition away from fossil fuels at the pace and scale that is necessary to really make a difference in mitigating climate change? How do we achieve that? We've come up with a lot of brilliant plans and very laudable goals for reaching 100% renewable, 100% carbon neutral. But how are we actually going to get there? And KIUC on Kauai has shown us part of the way. Right? They've moved faster than any other part of the state in reaching a very high penetration of renewable energy. The rest of the islands are a little more challenging than Kauai for various reasons, but they're also moving a lot faster now. And the real trick is, how do we do that while also hopefully driving down rates? Because this new energy that we're adding is cheaper than the old energy, right? So we should be able to figure out how to do this while reducing costs for consumers. And then also, how do we do it and maintain or even improve reliability? And so those are the big challenges we have ahead of us right now, and they're multifaceted. But I'm excited to be part of trying to make sure that we succeed in those ways.
I've got a data set, Colin, going back to well over 60 years as far as the energy percentages of what energy is coming into the state, what form of energy. In other words, what's been powering the state of Hawaii over the past 60 years. And back in around 1960, we were not surprisingly 99% dependent on imported petroleum. Pretty darn close to 100%, right? And the last data set I have, if I recall, is 2021. And that leaves us from close to 100% dependent upon imported petroleum back around 1960-ish to just recently, or at the present, we're around 80%, still 80% dependent upon imported petroleum for our entire economy, which of course is both power generation, where we've made substantial progress, and transportation, where we've made less progress. So I guess I'm asking you to put on your Colin Yost magic glasses crystal ball to mix the metaphors here. And how is it that we can make more dramatic, more substantive, faster progress beyond being only 20% energy independent, which we are more or less right now? What's your, do you have any? If you had a magic solution, I'm sure you already would have put it out there. So, what can you propose? What comes to mind as far as how can we do things better, number one, and faster, number two?
I think that HECO is behaving a lot more like KIUC these days in terms of their dedication and focus on rapidly expanding renewable generation of a variety of different resources. So, I actually am fairly optimistic they will continue down that path and will be much more aggressive than they were in the past in actually interconnecting those resources. So that's part of the puzzle. On the transportation side, obviously electric vehicles are now much more viable than they ever were before. That's a huge part of our fossil dependency in transportation is in vehicle travel. So electric vehicle infrastructure is something that the PUC does not have primary jurisdiction over, but we do play a role. And I'm hoping that we can be a facilitator at least in working with other state agencies to help expand and lay the groundwork for a very rapid build out of EV infrastructure, especially infrastructure that helps people who don't have a house to plug into already, because a lot of those people are going to wind up naturally switching to EVs anyway. And once they start to truly understand how much of a bargain it is in terms of lower maintenance and lower fuel cost, and as the price of electric vehicles comes down, and as the federal government finally, kind of cleans up and makes less confusing the tax credits they recently passed. So when all that stuff gets sorted out, there's going to be a rapid expansion among people who have a house to plug into. But we need to make sure as a government that we aggressively build out infrastructure that allows people who don't have that kind of resource at home to be able to join in and take advantage, just like everybody else who does have a house.
You know what's going to be very interesting to see as well is that as EV sales climb, which of course inevitably they will, 10% of new sales, 20%, 40%, 50%, that's going to be an increase in the amount of generation needed to be able to charge all those EVs, right? And I haven't seen any data sets. I haven't even really looked. I don't even know if they're out there, but I got to believe somebody, some smart mind or minds at DBET or the State Energy Office or you guys are crunching these numbers. And I look forward to taking a look at those before too long. But I mean, this is top of mind awareness, and it's also apropos to what we're talking about, Colin. So just in the past few days, Hawaiian Electric has announced that the 30 megawatts utility scale PV plant above Waikoloa Village here on my island with 120 megawatt hours of storage that was done by AES, big player here in the state, that plant has officially gone online. I mean, it's actually been online in some capacity for a while now, but maybe now it's up to full capacity. And that the other plants in the round one RFP, which was back in 2018, the other plant of the same size, 30 megawatts solar, 120 megawatts storage, that's going to be by Interjex on Parker Ranch land, not too far from Waikoloa. And if you just look at the numbers, so it took 5 years for the AES plant to come online. And according to the Interjex website, which I looked at earlier today, they're forecasting, I believe it is Q1 of 2024. So that's about a year from now. So in these two examples of 30 megawatt plant with 120 megawatt hours of storage, it took 5 and 6 years respectively, or it will take 6 years, assuming they're on target for that. 5 or 6 years from bidding, negotiation, to nail the PPAs down, last and best, final offer, and so forth and so on, all that language which you know very well, to actual online-ness of the plant. Now that we've got another round 3 going on between Hawaiian Electric and all bidders, I mean, Colin, is there much realistic hope that you have that these next plans are going to come online faster, or it's just this kind of what we have to get used to here, 5-6 years from start to finish before kilowatt hours, megawatt hours are produced?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are real serious efforts underway to shave 2 years off that timeline, to get it down to 3 years for these larger utility scale projects. And really, I think the only thing that might prevent that from happening is the ongoing supply chain and kind of global constraints that we see in various economies. But the RFP3 process, it requires all of the interconnection issues to get worked out a lot faster and to have that brought to the PUC at the same time that the PPA or the power purchase agreement is being presented for PUC approval. So those two things were bifurcated in the earlier RFPs, request for proposal, number 1 and 2. And there were sort of 2 decision-making processes that had to go through PUC. And that was recognized before I got to the PUC as a problem, right? It was slowing things down, unnecessarily. And so now that those are combined in RFP3, that should go significantly faster. That should also help the developers gain more certainty earlier in the decision-making process about interconnection costs and other complexities that might arise relating to the interconnection part of it? Because it's easy for them, to predict, or relatively easy anyway, for them to predict, how much it's going to cost them to procure the materials and site control and those other kind of things. But a wild card has always been, how easy is it going to be to ultimately interconnect after the interconnection requirements studies are complete? So that's being accelerated, it's being pushed forward, and I think the goal is to max out at 3 years for the total development timeline, soup to nuts.
Well, and as I'm sure you're aware, I mean, this is not specific to the state of Hawaii. I've seen the data, and the Wall Street Journal has covered it, and major publications in the mainland, that interconnect of these utility scale renewable energy projects has really become bogged down. I mean, and tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars are at stake in terms of queues, waiting. And just kind of apropos to, you mentioned supply lines, and you're probably following as I am. Joe Biden put a hiatus on any tariffs on modules coming from parts of Southeast Asia. And both the U.S. House and now just recently the Senate voted by a majority to essentially overturn that hiatus and to start the process of imposing tariffs on solar modules coming from Southeast Asia. And of course, the Solar Energy Industry Association, SEIA, is understandably up in arms about that. But the long and the short of it, of course, is that creates uncertainty in the market as far as, if you're a developer and you want to bid on RFP3 here in Hawaii, what are you going to assume the cost of your solar modules to be 4 years out? I mean, that's too rich for my blood. And there's just so much uncertainty. I mean, I just see the space for developers that are going for multi-megawatts utility scale to be really, really treacherous as far as uncertainties and a lot of money at stake, without necessarily having much, certainty of the end result of going online and selling your product to the utility company. Do you share that concern?
It would certainly be better. I don't mean to mix puns or words there, but it would be better to not have that kind of uncertainty, clearly. However, I think there's also the other side of the coin, which are all the really strong incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act and other legislation passed by Congress and signed by the administration. And so those two things are kind of, they're countervailing winds, I suppose. But I think end of the day, there's just a lot of enthusiasm for building renewable energy, and also a recognition on behalf of utilities and developers that this work really is necessary for the world, for the country, that it can reduce costs, that it is really important to mitigate the effects of climate change. And I don't think we will fail to do it. Can we stop getting in our own way? That would be wonderful. I think we all should strive as government and as manufacturers and developers to look, and look ourselves in the mirror very honestly, and to figure out when we are getting in our own way, what can we do to change that? Biden's going to veto those laws, obviously, and they're not passed by veto-proof margins, but
right.
But uncertainty still exists, as you said. That's true.
So, kind of this last point here, we've successive commissions, legislators, governors, everybody under the Hawaiian Sun has talked about the desire, if not necessity, to lower electric rates, highest in the country here, 46 or so cents a kilowatt hour here on the Big Island, higher on Molokai and Lanai. And it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to me in order to do that, as long as the state is so heavily dependent upon oil and the vagaries of the pricing of oil, right? I haven't looked in the past few days, it's probably around $80 or so a barrel. That in order to really have much of an effect on lowering electric costs, there's going to have to be a lot more, exponentially more renewable energy coming online that will be priced, let's say, 10 cents a kilowatt hour. I mean, this one at Waikoloa was in the 9 cents range. It'll be interesting to see what round 3 comes in at. I mean, is my assumption correct that as far as relief of the electric bills in the Hawaiian electric service territories, that it's probably not that realistic to hope for much relief until there is a very sizable increase in the amount of megawatts, lower cost megawatts that actually go online?
I think that's true as a general matter, but there is more we can do in the short term, especially for lower income communities and for ratepayers who do not have a rooftop that they control. Or maybe they have a rooftop they control, but they need roof repair, they need electrical infrastructure improvements to their home before they could participate in the distributed generation revolution that's going on. So I think the PUC is looking in the equity docket at those things. We're looking at trying to expand LIHEAP, the low income repayment assistance programs. There is no state program for it. There's just a federal program, which is inadequate to meet the need. And we're looking to try to add state resources to that. But also part of the equity docket is access to distributed renewable energy for people who don't currently have access, and beyond the whole concept of community solar. But what else can we do to actually make those savings, those benefits available to people who haven't been able to participate in the tax credit benefits that have been so generous in the past? So there is a lot that can be done from a policy perspective and a program perspective to try to reduce costs for the people who are getting hit the hardest, and we can do that relatively quickly. But on a grand scale, you're correct that until we replace the volatile, extremely expensive fossil fuels with lower cost renewables, we won't make a big difference in reducing rates. And we do have to also take into account that there will be a cost to this transition. There is other new infrastructure or infrastructure improvements that we'll have to invest in order to make that 100% renewable future possible. So we have to try to do all these things at the same time, and that's not easy, but I think it is possible.
Yeah. Well, it seems like we've barely touched the surface here, but that's a good reason to come back. And just to riff for a moment on community solar, you and I both know that it was back in 2015, thanks to Mike Gabbard and others in the Senate, and David Ige signing the community solar into law 2015, 8 years ago. And now it's been kind of reshaped as shared solar by Hawaiian Electric. And they, not too long ago, announced that they were, I think, was a two award winner, so to speak, on this island for shared solar shared solar programs. So progress is being made. We're working in the right direction, and I know you're doing what you can there every single day at the PUC. So I want to thank you so much, Colin, for joining us today, and I hope we can reconvene. We didn't get a chance to talk about equity, which is so important, and other juicy issues in Hawaii energy, and also look at some of the other parts of the kuleana that the PUC has, or other parts of the state's economy. So thank you very much, Colin, for joining us today.
You're very welcome. Great to talk to you, Marco.
Thank you. We'll have you back soon, I hope. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.